Charles, wonderful to see you today.
Very nice to be here.
Thank you for being with us. Your new book, Myself and Other More Important Matters, you talk about the first time you came to the United States, which I believe was 1966.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the first year that I went to Great Britain. And I know it's changed rather dramatically since then, as has the United States. But I was very interested to get, from your perspective as a management philosopher, and I hope that's a fair thing to call you, a management philosopher. I'd like to get your take on how both the United Kingdom and the United States have changed and evolved since you first came here.
Well, 1966, not many people from Britain had been to America, actually. It was still a sort of dream country. So it was terribly exciting to go there. And I found it an extraordinarily exciting place. We were going to the moon. It seemed an impossible dream, but you were about to do it. There was a Vietnam War going on. But that particular time, you still thought that you would win it. Though it proved out to be an unwinnable war, in a sense. I was terribly excited by the energy, the optimism, the self-confidence that I found in America. Britain at that time was still going through a sort of agony of self-doubt, what their place was in the world. The unions were trying to run the country. Things seemed to be going downhill. We hadn't reached the bottom yet, when we had an actually 3-day working week that was still to come.
3 days?
3 days, because there wasn't enough electricity around to keep the offices alight. But that was to come. That was in the 1970s. But we were getting there. It was a depressing place. And I remember coming back from America and feeling that everything was so heavy and leaden in Britain. The coins were too heavy in my pocket. The rain was heavier. Things moved much more slowly. It was terribly difficult to get things done. We came to Boston again 3 days ago to a conference on the future of the corporation, in which one of the big questions was, is there a future? And actually for the first time, I really felt that America was a bit downbeat. There was a lack of self-confidence. People weren't coming to London because it was too expensive. And in a sense, that wasn't our fault. that was your fault.
Yes.
Because of the dollar. There was a feeling that you were in another unwinnable war, seemingly not having learnt the lessons of the last unwinnable war. There was a feeling that America wasn't as much admired around the world as it used to be. But at the same time, London, I have to say, where I live, is boundlessly optimistic. It seems that the financial center, it is at least equal to New York now, if not past it. The favored place for investment banks and others to locate themselves. The theater is thriving. House prices are extraordinarily high, but that is, I think, just a measure of its popularity as a place to work. But London and England, even Europe, can never lead the world in the way that America can. So I do hope that America recovers its self-confidence, because we need you.
Right. I should tell the viewers who may be looking at this sometime in the future about your remark on the theater in London. We're in New York at the moment. There is no theater in New York because there's a strike of stagehands. So you definitely have better theater in London right now. Let me ask you, when you were a young man, you had a classical education. You learned Greek, you learned Latin, you read the Greek philosophers, and in fact, that's informed a lot of your thinking on business. They don't teach Greek and Latin in business school, or any other schools in the United States, at least today. How do you feel that the ending of a classical education, as people once got it, is affecting the ability of business leaders today?
I don't think history repeats itself, but it's extraordinarily useful to learn from it. All empires have their end. America might usually study what happened to the Roman Empire, which ruled the world for 300 years or more, because the signs of decay were obvious there 100 years before it actually ended. I hope America has more than 100 years to go, but some of the same signs are there, and I think one can learn from that. I learned a lot from studying history, not so much the facts, but the process, because what you have to do in history, actually, is to take the known facts and weave them together to form a narrative of what the situation is and where it might lead to. And exactly that is what business leaders need to do, to take the known facts, which are not enough, they're never enough, and to somehow weave a narrative together which describes what they come to call a strategy. So I think they can learn from that. I learned more from philosophy, actually. And I have to tell you, as I was writing this memoir, I kept finding that I had to turn back to the greatest of all teachers, Aristotle, who had the irritating habit of having anticipated all our problems 2,500 years ago and having the answer. And so I think that to live through life without actually having known what Plato was on about, or Aristotle, and Socrates, is a sad lack, because they asked questions. They were curious. Socrates, the pupil of Plato, never told anybody what to do. He only asked questions, and he kept saying why. And I think that our business school teachers could learn a lot from Socrates, because he never preached, he only questioned. And I think that's actually what business people need to do, to ask why. The great entrepreneurs ask why. Why not? And as a result, they grow their businesses. And I think being steeped as I was for 4 years in Socrates gave me a habit of mind.
I want to ask you a question that I was asked to ask you by a young woman who is getting ready to graduate from high school next year, wants to go into business. She said, I would like to know what Mr. Handy would recommend. Should I go into a business school as an undergraduate? Should I seek a BBA? Or would I be better off as an undergraduate to major in something like philosophy or history?
Undoubtedly, in my experience, philosophy and history. Which is not to say that an undergraduate degree in business isn't useful in an educational way, because it's a very broad course. You dip into psychology, you dip into sociology, you dip into economics, you dip into law, you dip into finance and management, and it's actually quite a good preparation for life in a very practical, pragmatic sort of way. You learn some useful tricks. It does not teach you to be a manager. It does not, in a sense, prepare you especially for business. It prepares you for life, I think. But if you really want to be successful in business, yes, philosophy and history are much better. We found, when I was running the graduate side of the London Business School, that the best students were historians, actually, because there's this habit of mind they had of being able to bring together certain facts and create the narrative.
My wife will be delighted to hear that. She's completing her PhD in history, so she'll be very pleased.
She'll be a very successful businesswoman.
You said you just attended a conference on the future of the corporation. I recently read a book where the author was suggesting that there needed to be some serious changes in the way we view corporations. That they shouldn't be reviewed, they shouldn't be looked at as people. They should be looked at, they shouldn't be forced to make moral choices. They shouldn't be taxed. They shouldn't be charged with criminal acts. We should look at it strictly as a legal fiction. What is your view philosophically on the role of the corporation and on the future of the corporation?
Too much power.
Okay.
They are abusing the nation, in my view. They are externalizing too many of their costs. I don't just mean that they're polluting the environment, expecting us to clean it up. They're actually expecting us to train all their workers, as opposed to educating citizens. So they complain in Britain that they're not adequately equipped to work in a modern high-tech factory or a modern high-tech office. Why on earth should we do that? We're trying to educate them in history and philosophy or languages or whatever, which may or may not be useful to them in business. If they want to put them and get them trained for their business, they should be training it. Why should the voters and the ordinary citizens pay for that? They invented this wonderful device called just-in-time management, which basically clogs up our highways as though their warehouses are effectively large lorries sitting in traffic jams on the highways for which we have to pay. They are polluting the environment, as you see, and not on the whole paying for it. Now this is beginning to change, but I think they have too much power. They're driven by the demands of the people who have invested in them. Actually, not the people who invested in them, but the people who bought shares from those who invested in them, or rather the people 20 times down the line who bought the shares of people who originally long ago invested in them, and then seem to claim the right to actually sell them, and they're not doing to sell the business, not just the shares, when it's not doing as well as they would like to do. And I don't see why the people who indirectly invested money in them should have more clout than the people who actually create the wealth, who are the people working in the corporation, only a few of whom get extravagantly rewarded, 400 times on average more than the people at the bottom. Plato thought 4 times was about justified.
You've anticipated my next question. When you came to the U.S. for the first time, the average CEO made what, maybe 20 times the average pay? Today it's maybe 400 or 500 times. What, is this a bad thing? How should a CEO be rewarded for the accomplishments of a company while in their turn?
Well, I don't like share options to begin with.
Okay.
I think it's a form of raping the shareholders, and now at long last you've had to actually declare them, but on the profit and loss account. Before that, nobody need know of anything about them at all, and you just stole them from the shareholders, which I think was. But worse than that, it identifies the top management with the interests of the shareholders. This is meant to be a good thing, but in part, of course, shareholders actually not particularly interested in the long-term future of the corporation. In fact, they're never asked what they're interested in. I mean, they deal roughly through, insurance companies or pension funds or whatever, who have to work in the short term because people want the money back from the pension funds. They don't really work out that actually they're getting the money out of the corporations, whose continued existence is actually vital for those pension funds. But nobody makes that sort of connection, isn't able to make that connection. So here are the managers. And in a funny perversion of what Adam Smith said, that self-interest by the businessman works for the general interest, we now have the self-interest of the chief executives works for the self-interest of the corporation, works for the makes for the general interest. So in other words, the more the chief executive makes, the better for the country. I don't believe that. It's a perversion of what Adam Smith actually meant. Now, Plato would have said, well, maybe 20 times, given that we've had a little inflation and life has got a bit more complicated. But then you see, if you elevate the pay of the people at the bottom, the person at the top does very well indeed.
Well.
The best way to get rich is to make the people at the bottom rich, which is the secret of success in all economies. Don't make the people at the top richer. It doesn't trickle down. Make the people at the bottom richer, because then it trickles up, actually. So we got it the wrong way around in the corporation, actually, I think. And I think basically it's pretty obscene. The average citizen sitting there watching somebody walk away having failed, having lost his company $8 billion in the last year, to actually then be paid $150 million for the privilege of leaving.
Please just go away and take our money with you.
So the message from America clearly is, if you want to get rich, succeed quickly, and then fail fast.
Will this change? Do you see any dynamic that's occurring today that's going to reverse this?
Well, I think popular indignation is gradually working its way through. I just cannot understand why people want so much money, and I don't see how they feel that they can deserve it. Because, yes, of course, they're at the top of the heap, and that's very important, because they do set the strategy and the vision and all the rest of it for the corporation. But the success of that vision and that strategy depends on the people underneath them. So personally, I would prefer to see every company adopting a profit-sharing basis, not stock options, but to take a portion of the surplus that they have created, give a due amount back to the investors because the share price has got to be held up and they need it. But a certain proportion should be allocated to everybody who works there. And perhaps the more senior people should get some more, but I would make it a percentage of their basic salary so that everybody shares in the profit and not just a favored few.
Okay. You have a lot of experience in the media, on the BBC. Now we have the Internet. Is the Internet on whole a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's inevitable. I think we have yet to know the answer to that. There's a sort of sexual appeal about new technology, particularly amongst the young, who are gripped by it in a way that they never seem to be gripped by the written word and in books or even by television. This is a very personalized medium that they can use for their own devices. Everybody can be his own publisher, his own editor, and I think they find that extraordinarily exciting. Whether they will continue to find it exciting, I'm not sure, as we get drowned in other people's blogs, and there comes no authoritative voice anymore because any voice counts as loudly and as much as any other voice coming over the computer. And I worry about the demise of newspapers and stuff that sticks around a bit, like books and journals and so on. Because these things on the screen, I mean, yes, of course, they're there permanently, but whether we want to look at them a week later, I'm not sure how many people go through last month's emails with any regularity. So it makes life much more instant, and I worry about that. It makes it overly too democratic, perhaps, and that everybody's the same as everybody else. But not everybody's opinion should count the same as everybody else. So I welcome the freedom it gives to people. I think it's a wonderful device for people to actually learn if they want to. It's a way of introducing them to worlds that they would never other have encountered, that the whole of the knowledge of the world is there in front of them, and Google has provided them with the libraries of the world. So that's fantastic. But I worry about the shortening of time horizons and the disappearing of authoritative voices.
You and your wife have worked closely together through many, many years of marriage. You've written how many books together?
Together we've written 5.
5 books. What is the secret to being able, because I'm thinking of writing a book with my wife, somebody who actually knows where commas goes. What's the secret to having a successful marriage that also entwines intellectually and in a business sense at the same time?
Well, for the first half of we've been married now 46 years. For the first half, we were a very traditional marriage. I went out and supposedly earned the bacon, and she looked after the home. Though I must admit, she also earned a bit of the bacon, working as a freelance consultant and designer and so on. And then the children left home, and we discovered that really we had nothing much to talk about in a way, because we'd lived in 2 separate worlds, and the thing that joined us together was the family. So I went independent to be a writer, but forgot to ask anybody for money when I produced my words or lectures and so on. And so Elizabeth decided that she ought to take my business interests in hand. And then so gradually we sort of began to work together. And I now say that I'm on my second marriage, but it's the same woman, which is remarkably satisfying. So, we have to be very careful about the division of our time and our lives and our work. So we have very separate roles. She is my business manager. I do not answer the telephone because I might say something that she would disapprove, or I might agree to something that she would not advise. And she negotiates all my agency fees and travel arrangements, etc., etc. And I do the writing. When we get to the books together, she takes the photographs. She's a very skilled portrait photographer, very imaginative and innovative, and I provide the words. More than that, we have two homes. One is ours, one is mine, one is hers. We alternate between them, once in the country, once in the town. In the country, I do the housekeeping and the cooking. In the town, she does it.
Is yours Tuscany or is hers Tuscany?
No, we've had to get rid of Tuscany.
Oh, okay.
So I was in the English countryside, mine, and hers is in London.
Okay.
And so, you provide, you in a sense preserve the harmony by preserving the separateness of it. So that our work is collaborative, but very different in our contributions, and we must be careful not to tread in each other's space. We have very separate working spaces. They're linked together by a common space, so it's all separate but together.
It's all separate portfolios, but in the same file drawer.
That's absolutely right.
If somebody bought this book and said, "Wow, this is the first book by Charles Handy that I've read. I want to get one of his other books," where would you advise them to start? Which book would you say?
Well, it depends. If they were in business, I would actually advise them to look at one of my very early books called The Gods of Management.
Okay.
Because it's a very good introduction to why businesses and organizations in general can be different one from the other. There is no general style of management or particular rules. I use the Greek gods as symbols of different kinds of leadership and different kinds of organizations. But if they're a more general reader, thinking more about life and where it's leading and so on, I would advise them to read either The Age of Unreason, which was the first book that really hit the American public, or perhaps better, The Empty Raincoat, which had to be called The Age of Paradox in America for strange reasons. Well, the Empty Raincoat was a title I took from America because it was I'm in the sculpture garden in Minneapolis. I discovered this statue of a raincoat standing there with nobody in it. Huh. And I had that morning been in the head offices of a couple of corporate headquarters in Minneapolis, and I had the impression of a lot of empty raincoats behind the desks. People who'd left their souls behind. And the story of the empty raincoat basically is the pursuit of economic growth without consideration of human beings leads us down a dark alleyway. And it was so, in a sense, I was trying to argue for a more sort of civilized, balanced kind of society. Mm-hmm. And when the American publishers wanted to publish it, they said they could not use that title because it was pornographic.
Okay.
We were puzzled. Various thoughts came to our mind, but none seemed satisfactory. And I discovered that the New Scientist magazine in Britain then ran a competition which had said that Charles Handy's book, The Empty Raincoat, has been renamed in America because it was pornographic. Has anybody got any ideas why that might be? But it was interesting. So it was called The Age of Paradox.
So if somebody goes to Amazon or Barnes & Noble to order it, they should look for The Age of Paradox.
Age of Paradox in America, yes.
Okay. All right. Finally, what do you want your legacy to be? As you look back on your career, how would you like people to think of the contributions you made?
Well, two things about that. One is that the last chapter in this book is a reflection as I lie in bed, age 70 in the morning of my birthday, and wondered what life had all been about. And I did decide, actually, that looking back, the books will vanish and crumble into dust, and the radio broadcasts will be totally forgotten. And so will my early career in Shell and professorships and so on. The CV will be forgotten. And so that all one's earthly achievements, in a sense, are worth nothing. What really mattered in the end was family and friends. And what they thought of you was what really mattered, actually. But for the general public, perhaps that I made them think. about the things that really matter.
Oh, wonderful. That's a wonderful legacy for anyone to have, is the family and the friends that have their own lives enriched by that relationship. Well, Charles, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it, and I know everyone will enjoy your latest book.
Thank you.
You bet.
Very nice.